Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Marisol Jimenez, and I am so excited to welcome you to this webinar today. This is being offered through the Coping with Corona Collective, and this series is an emerging response from our community as we all try to understand what this global pandemic means for us, for our loved ones, and our movement efforts in ways that I think are still revealing themselves to us. So as we witness what is truly the unmasking of how deeply rooted our oppressive systems have been really all along, and as we watch the cracks in the foundation of these structures as they collapse, there are so many challenges and opportunities that are presenting themselves. So I think that the question for us, among so many questions, is, how do we step into this moment in ways that build our path to liberation and healing as people and as communities? And how is equity going to be a cornerstone of our collective survival? So I am incredibly honored to introduce you to my mentor, my coach, and a part of my found family for always, Desiree Adaway. Desiree is an internationally recognized thought leader on issues of equity and an active co-conspirator in dismantling white supremacy in our lifetimes. And she's worked for over 25 years in every sector, from frontline movement spaces, nonprofits, corporations, and all of this to move folks towards really innovative and bold equity change. And so I'm so grateful for all the ways that she has dedicated her life to helping us get free, and for her generosity in offering to hold space with us today. And so it's really my pleasure to introduce to you Desiree Adaway.
Thanks, Marisol. You can't get rid of me. You can't quit me.
I wouldn't even try.
So I am happy to be here with y'all. I'm going to take over and share my screen. So I hope everyone can see that. Can y'all see that? And can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Marisol is going to be monitoring the chat for me. Nobody wants to hear me talking for an hour, so this is going to be as interactive as we can make it. And I just want us to be able to spend some time in what is uncertain and unprecedented event happening right now that we're all in the middle of. But like most events, we're not all being affected by it equally, right? And so we're going to talk about how equity is one of the keys to our collective survival. Just briefly, this is who I am. Marisol told y'all who I am. Desiree Adaway, she, her, hers pronoun, consultant, trainer, speaker. Really, my work has been, whether inside organizations or out, but helping to build resilient, equitable, and inclusive organizations. I really hope to hold a vision for people's lives and workplaces and communities until they can hold that for themselves. So why this topic? We've never one day lived without oppression. Right? And our systems are working just as they were built to work, with this hierarchy in place. And what Marisol mentioned, right? This kind of unfolding, this unseeing of this hierarchy is becoming clearer to clearest every day in this time of crisis. And so we really must be building relationships across these hierarchies for our survival. The advised precautions, right, that we're getting from the healthcare system and from folks is to focus on ourselves, right? To wash your hands and cover your mouth and don't host meetings and don't come in contact with other people. And these precautions are making us turn inward, right? Right now. And they're interrupting our daily lives. But we almost must really be clear that the more and more we turn inward, the more of it that is doing something to us and to our humanity, right? So building and nurturing and sustaining healthy relationships is hard work. It's going to be even harder work in light of what we're dealing with right now. And developing trust is an essential aspect to healthy relationships, which is particularly difficult across human differences due to the complexity of dominant and non-dominant group identities, but also now the complexity of us not being able to be together in public spaces. So this is the truth that we know, is that we all harbor unconscious assumptions that get in the way of our good intentions and keep us from building real authentic relationship with people across differences on a good day, not in times of pandemic, right? So I just want to read a little bit from this quote from Bell Hooks, because, you know, in times of problems, you really want to bring Bell Hooks into the situation. So cultures of domination rely on the cultivation of fear as a way to ensure obedience. In our society, we make much of love and say little about fear, yet we're all terribly afraid most of the time. And as a culture, we're obsessed with the notion of safety. Yet we do not question why we live in states of extreme anxiety and dread. Fear is the primary force upholding systems of domination. It promotes the desire for separation, the desire not to be known. When we're taught that safety always lies in sameness, the indifference of any kind will appear as a threat. When we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is the choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. Right. So when I talk about dominant culture today, I just want to briefly make sure y'all understand exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about white supremacy, right? That historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents and nations and peoples of color by white people for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege, right? It's a political, economic, and cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources. Conscious and unconscious ideas of white supremacy and the entitlement are widespread. And the relationships of white dominance and non-white subordination are daily reenacted, right? Through institutional and social settings, through our healthcare. Who's getting tested right now in this country? Who is ultimately worthy of testing, right? Worthy of being laid off or of not having to work with pay, right? White supremacy is the system of oppression that empowers white people at the expense of people of color. Patriarchy, a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. Heterosexism, the ideological system that denies, denigrates, and stigmatizes any non-heterosexual form of behavior, identity, relationship, or community. Capitalism, right? A capitalist nation is determined by free markets, right? An economic system in which both prices and production are dictated by corporation, private companies in competition with one another, and places a heavy focus on private property, economic growth, freedom of choice, and limited government intervention. The kind of impact that capitalism has on your life depends on whether you're a worker or a boss. It's a huge driver of inequality, both social and economic. It is by nature exploitive and leads to brutally divided society that tramples the working class. And then we have Christian hegemony, that everyday pervasive systemic set of Christian values and beliefs, individuals and institutions that dominate all aspects of our society through social, political, economic, and cultural power that they wield. So what do all of these have in common? What's the underlying bit is power. Who decides who will have access to resources? Who decides who can influence behaviors of others? And who decides the course of events? So I'm gonna take a minute. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box. Marcel's gonna be monitoring that for me. But here's a question for all y'all to think of, and please share your response in the chat. Whose survival are we overlooking to keep power in place? Think about your community. Think about where you work. Think about where you play. Think about your neighborhood. Whose survival are we overlooking to keep power in place? Take a minute and share in the chat box. Essential workers. Yeah, have y'all noticed that essential workers are folks who don't get paid a livable wage? But now they're all being deemed essential workers. Who else are we overlooking to keep power in place? Those who live in tighter spaces. Hey, Claire, can you unmute yourself? Would you be okay with that? Yeah, so who are we overlooking? Folks who live in...
Well, somebody mentioned immigrants. I'm thinking of people who are in detention centers, as well as jails, as well as even I feel like in Asheville, we can get away from each other a little bit more because we have more space here than we would if maybe we lived in inner city DC or New Orleans or New York, apartment complexes.
Right. You can go walk on the parkway, right? I mean, you can go hike.
Right, to get out, get exercise for mental health,
yeah,
and physical health.
Great, thank you for that. All right. Who else? Mothers, caregivers. Hey, Beth Berry, can you unmute yourself and talk about mothers?
Sure. I work directly with dozens of mothers in my coaching practice, and it's kind of staggering the amount of rearranging that's happening in order to figure out how to meet the standards of schools and that kind of thing right now, and work full-time from home and maintain the household, that kind of thing. So I've seen it a lot in this moment.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Yeah, there's so many people whose survival we're just leaving out there. The elderly, right? Folks with disabilities, folks who are compromised, whose immune systems are already compromised, undocumented folks, healthcare workers. Hey, Robin, yeah, can you unmute yourself and tell us what you shared?
Sure, yeah. Kids who are expected to keep up with schoolwork outside of school spaces. You know, there's an expectation that kids would have the opportunity to be supported in getting their work done.
Yeah, the understanding that folks had access to the technology that they needed, to connectivity that they needed, right? So that they can continue on. Yeah. Thank you all. Keep talking amongst yourselves as we are sharing. That's actually how we get through this, by sharing with one another. So I just want to briefly walk through this slide, which I use a lot in my work, which talks about dominant group perspective versus non-dominant group perspective. So dominant group perspective, unaware of their groupness, you know, and this is one of the illnesses, right, of this country, this sense of rugged individualism. That everything I got because I did it myself, right? So this way that dominant folks in this country, right, male, white, straight, Christian, middle age, physically abled, right? Middle class, upper middle class. The way that these folks just navigate, we navigate this world with the sense that, oh, am I a part of a group? Right? The dominant folks make and enforce rules, right? You'll hear folks of dominant culture say, but look how much progress we've made, right? They know very little about dominant group, a non-dominant group. What we learn about folks who are not us is limited information, misinformation, or no information. Dominant group wants to just focus on diversity, having something they can count and touch in the room, but they're not talking about shared power. Right? They want to see individual acts of harm. Well, that was John, and that was Mary, and that was Susan, and that was Tim. You know, you have to forgive them. That's how they act, right? They don't see that I've been microaggressed 5 times in a week and a half while trying to navigate this space. There's this sense of internalized dominance, okay? And folks who are not in that dominant group, right? Folks of color, folks living in poverty, right? The very young or the very old. Right? All these people are constantly aware of their groupness because they know that these systems have rendered them invisible. And we know this when we see politicians, even in this town, talking about folks as if they don't exist, right? They don't talk about them. They don't take into their needs. They don't have an analysis about who they are and how they live their lives. And so they're not included in social and political discourse. Non-dominant folks will always tell you, yeah, we've done this, but we still have so much further we have to go. I ain't free today. I'm not going to be free tomorrow. So what is the work we need to put in so that can happen? And folks with non-dominant group perspective are always fully versed in the culture, beliefs, laws, practices of dominant group. I know how to make white people feel so comfortable because I had to. It is a skill that I can do in my sleep because it allows me to get jobs and promotions and stay safe. Right? But there's a cost that I've paid for that, and that can show up as internalized depression. Right? It works in white supremacy's favor that we think little as possible about people of color. It works in the patriarchy's favor and heterosexism favor that we don't think about these things, or the way that systems are impacting folks other than ourselves. Right? So this is it. Separation is a tool of oppression, and it always have been. And we've been socialized through this system and this Western culture to compete with one another. There must be a winner, so someone has to lose, right? That if you push against the status quo, you will be punished. Your livelihood can be taken away from you. To be quiet and polite and not ask for what you need or want. Because you know what the gift is that we get when we're quiet? We get the gift of being left alone. Right? Where comfort is a value. We see it as a value and our right. It is a value, and dare you to take it away from me. Why do you think people out here buying guns at an obscene rate currently? Right? That we're not allowed to make mistakes, that everything must be controlled. We will be considered a mistake. There's this fallacy that we're all socialized with of supremacy, which is maintained via legal and economic systems. It's this fallacy, this internalized fallacy of hierarchy amongst humans. Okay. And then we're taught to perform when we're scared and insecure and confused. Because we cannot show up as our authentic selves, because that's not what the systems want, and you get punished for it. Right? Separation and segregation have always been tools of oppression. And so sociologist Kevin Kruse says that desegregation of public schools in Atlanta, Georgia went smoothly, not because whites accepted the decision, because they decided to flee and leave public spaces. They joined private clubs or built pools in their backyards, right? Recreating for them a safe space. Because we see a safe space as a segregated space. And part of our work will have to be at the end of this pandemic is, how do we come back together in public spaces? Who will be able to do that? And what will be considered safe? Right? So we've been socialized to live in separate worlds. Bias is the air we breathe. Believing that you have no worth, that you don't have a bias, is worse than acknowledging that you do. We've all been socialized to be separate and unequal. So this is the reality. Power is relational, and power is exercised, not acquired. In everyday interactions, we either contribute to unequal power dynamics or we interrupt them. Every day, we either contribute to unequal power dynamics or we interrupt them. Cindy Suarez wrote this great book called The Power Manual. And Cindy talks about two types of power. Supremacist power, which is related to a scarcity consciousness. The world holds a limited supply of things we want, like belonging and recognition and opportunities and access. And it sees difference as something to be ignored or to be viewed as a cause of separation. The way that we rank each other and rank identities. Okay? And then there's liberatory power. The ability to create what we want stems from this abundance consciousness and helps us refrain from exerting power over. We view differences as strength. We see this interdependence as an option and a way of writing new narratives. So that prototypical person that's been raised in privilege and been taught implicitly or explicitly that they have the answers, skills that are needed to rescue others from situation, right? This is what we need to understand. Power relationships are reproduced. With whom do you build relationships and alliances with, and why? Whose interests are being served as you make decisions? Who has power and how do they secure it? And is power connecting us through, in, and for justice? No matter who we're with, in relationship with, power is there. It is embedded in trust and collaboration. Okay. So my question to y'all, and you can use the chat box. With whom do you build relationships and alliances with, and why? And as you're building these relationships, do you only see yourselves as the expert? Do you see yourself as the person who possesses all of the answers and skills? Have you been implicitly or explicitly taught that saving others is your duty? Do you continue to put white interests and white perspectives central to solutions? What we build on the other side of this cannot be built with any kind of savior mentality. Whom you're building relationships with and why cannot have any type of savior mentality at the center of it. So let's see what folks got going in the chat box. Collaborators who can extend and enhance the impact I want to have in the world. So Stacy, I also want you to think about, are you good partnership material? What are you bringing to the table? Are you always acknowledging how power is at play? Right? Right? We want it right. You want to be in a relationship with people in power who can help redistribute power. That's self-interest. Right? Dr. Ibrahim Kendi talks about racism not as being about hate, but being about self-interest, political, social, economic, political, and cultural self-interest. Right? How is power at play? McCurtis, can you unmute yourself? How do you think about power as you think about diversifying your relationships?
Hi, I was just talking to this with Bianca, who I think is here too, but I think about this in Asheville so much more than other places I've lived, where I'm a white and my whole family's white, and I want to have a diverse group of friends and go to, diverse places, but that I struggle with the idea that it's a one-sided, that's something that I want for my children. I want that for myself. It feels one-sided.
Yeah. So, Dr. God, I'm forgetting. She's a MacArthur Genius Award winner. She did the 1619 project, Hannah Nicole Jones, right? Has done all this research and writing in New York City around schools. And one thing she talks about is diversity, right? So there are 1.1 million school children in New York City, and there are only about 10 schools that are super diverse, really, out of all of these. And every parent is trying to get into these schools, right? Because this is where you want your kids to go. And white parents, of course, want their children to be in these mixed classes so that their children have this most beautiful experience, right? And the research that Hannah Nicole Jones came up with is a classroom can't be more than 30% of kids of color. And these kids cannot be poor. Like, that was a no-no. So they want this very kind of picked and group of folks so that their children have the most amazing experience in school, right? So that their kids can be like, oh, I went to school with all these different types of kids and it was so wonderful. What nobody ever talks about is the 800 plus thousand, 900 plus thousand kids who don't get to go to one of those schools. What's happening to them? The other thing nobody ever talks about is those 20 or 30% of kids of color sitting in those classrooms. What is that experience like for them? Right? Because you're right. That is the self-interest. You want your kids to have that. And they can have it. But there's also a price that comes from that. Because if you want your kids to be around have more diverse school experience, then you can make sure that they go to the all-Black neighborhood school. Right? So there's these ways that we are making these choices every day that uphold power. Right? That uphold power. So what does it take? The key to our collective work is trust. The key to our individual work is courage. How do we be brave and create brave public spaces? How do we build deep, authentic trust with one another? So I want you to think about that. I'm not even talking about across differences, but what are 3 things that you can do to build more honesty and trust in your life where it is right now? Take a few minutes and you can use the chat box. What are 3 things that you can do to build more intimacy and trust in your life right now? Transparency, absolutely. Vulnerability, humility. Be vulnerable, be accountable, be reciprocal. Take risk. That's right, show courage. Own your flaws, listen, absolutely. Listen to others. Radical honesty. Create space for others to be their authentic self as you do that. Repair when possible. Reconciliation is core to this work. Allow others to be experts of their lives. Hear feedback. Tell the truth to myself and others. Yeah. Shut up and listen. Focus on the impact of actions, not intent. Yeah, y'all got some good suggestions. Keep them coming, right? And I'm going to ask you, why aren't you doing these things? You know what to do. Why aren't you doing them? Right? That's right. Great, y'all. So I want to talk about two models. And let's be clear, right now, this society that we live in, we are in this dominator model, right? So, and it's the way that we've organized society. So this is from Rian Esler, partnershipway.org. And these are two models that Rian offers as a way to kind of expand people's frame of reference, to think about new ways to conceptualize reality, and really to challenge the assumptions that human nature or our innate differences alone are responsible for inequities. Right? And so these, what we're going to be looking at really helps us to evaluate current systems, but this is it. We have to be able to envision new systems, right? Liberation, we ain't never been liberated. We ain't never been free. And folks in dominant culture, you ain't been free either, because you've been raised with lies, with lack of information and education. You've been told myths about why you're superior. Right? So these are two types, different types of social organization. And I just want to walk us through them. They're actually based on actual human societies, right? And so let's look at the dominator model. Ranking and inequality, in which differences are systemically converted into superior and inferior, right? We do this with race, we do this with class, we do this with gender, right? It's hierarchical and it is authoritarian. It is institutionalized social violence is critical to keeping it in place. And there's always this widespread infliction of or threat of pain. Right? Since this dominator model relies on fear and force to maintain it, trust is always being undermined. Power is often used to dominate and destroy people as well as nature. And a sense of scarcity is created to justify this exploitive economic policies and politics of fear. Planning is always short-term, with little thought for future generations. Okay? This is exactly where we are right now in this world. Okay? And then we have the partnership model. The partnership model highlights linking in which differences, right, are valued and respected. It has a low degree of social violence, where violence is not a structural component of the system. It's generally egalitarian, right? And interactions are based on mutual respect and empowerment. In this partnership system, human relationships are held together more by trust and pleasure than by fear and pain. A quality of actively nourished. Power is generally used to give, nurture, and illuminate life. A sense of abundance is created with the value of ensuring that people are taken care of. We plan for the long term, concern for the present and future generations. Okay? We get to choose which one of the ways, which model do we want to. And this is a time of great unveiling. When we can let fear and force rule, or we can let trust and pleasure and an understanding of respect and values to guide how we live our lives. So this work happens on a systemic level, which is what we just looked at. But this is what this means for this work to happen on the individual level. Qualities of authentic relationships. You have to be willing to do your work. You have to do your own healing around your own pain and your own pain in your lived experience. You have to be willing to hear the anger of the non-dominant group members and not take it personally. Anger and rage are understandable byproducts of oppression. And so don't become defensive or take it personally when people in non-dominant identities need to talk about their anger and pain in powerful ways. Be willingness to remain in relationship with each other. We're not practiced or proficient in authentic relationship building. How many of y'all grew up talking about power at home? Right? Or even acknowledging power differentials. Right? This process of staying in relationship is fluid, right? And continually open for redefinition, not to stay in places where people are causing you harm or violence. It is fluid and continually open for redefinition. And it should be designed to create sustainability. Our willingness to understand the power of language. Know that language is a primary way in which we communicate our thoughts and ideas, and that language has been influenced by racism, sexism, and systems of dominance, right? And that language contains inherent bias and prejudice and power. And so spend time understanding and unraveling your use and misuse of language. Focus on the impact of your words and actions rather than your intentions. Well-intentioned racists and sexists are simply racist and sexist. Right? Focusing on impact allows you to challenge, to point out privilege, and work towards a more meaningful and authentic relationship. I trust feedback from I listen to feedback. I act on feedback from people I'm in right relationship with, who I trust. If Marisol says to me, Desiree, your ass is hanging out right now, I'm gonna believe her. Because we've built a relationship of trust. I can hear that. I can take that feedback in. There's to be a willingness to be comfortable with unfinished conversations. We have to be intentional, purposeful, and intimate in our dialogue with each other. And we have to be willing to hold both joy and pain in relationships. There will be pain, and that's okay. Sit in that for a while. We can be there. As well as really celebrating the joys that comes from being in deep, right relationship with one another. So, how many of y'all have heard about the cycle of liberation from Dr. Bobby Harrow? Let me know in the chat, how many of y'all have seen this? Marisol learned it from me. Okay, great. So this model is really, it has a companion piece, the cycle of socialization, which comes first. And from the cycle of socialization, there's a point where we get to make a decision. Are we going to keep the status quo, or are we going to leave it and we're going to step into something else? Yeah, I can make it bigger. Is that helpful? Right? So liberation begins when people begin to experience themselves differently in the world, right? This can be marked by some interpersonal change, right? We're waking up. It can be the result of some critical incident, like, I don't know, a pandemic, right? Or it can be just some slow evolutionary process that we all go through. We may experience some form of cognitive dissonance, where something that used to make sense to us, or something that we never questioned, ceases to make sense, right? And so during this phase of waking up, right, it is some kind of critical incident, right, that really shakes us. And that leads to us getting ready. And getting ready happens in kind of 3 phases. The empowerment of self, which usually happens through introspection and education and conscious raising. This kind of gaining inspiration. We spend this time like finding authentic voices, our voices, building our connections. We get self-educated, we get inspired, we get an analysis. We really start looking at ways that we've colluded and privileged from these systems. We look at our internalized oppression and our internalized dominance, and we really develop these analysis and tools that we need. So then we reach out, right? And we may do this through movement building, through experiences that we're sharing with other people. We begin to name injustices. We take stands. We use tools. We learn more and better tools to explore and experiment. And this is happening personally and interpersonally, right? Because during this process of waking up and getting ready, it changes in how we value others and how we see the world. And then we build community. Community, this is where we begin to think about dialoguing with people who are like us for support. And this is where we began to be like, I'm going to spend more time dialoguing with people who are different from me. So I can gain understanding, right? And help to build coalitions. This kind of building community is really about ongoing dialogue. It's about building trust, right? This is about understanding who are listened to and valued. And then from building a deeper relationship with people who are like us and people who are different from us, things start coalescing. We're organizing, we're planning, we're lobbying, we're fundraising, we're educating. We're renaming reality, right? We're being allies. We're transforming our anger into action. We're building up leaders in our community, right? And then from there, we move into creating change. And whereas reaching out was about the interpersonal, creating change is about the systemic. We're influencing policies and assumptions and structures and definitions and rules. We're healing. Healing is a big part of this. And we're sharing power in really real ways. And this focus is systemic, in changing in structures, in philosophy, in procedures, in roles. And we're really gonna need this once we're allowed to come back together in public spaces, right? And I want y'all to understand what's at the center of liberation, right? Because at the center of liberation, we cannot change systems, procedures, philosophy, rules without the core that holds us together. And at the core of liberation is self-love, is hope, is balance, is joy, security, support, some kind of spiritual base, and real right relationship with others. Right? At the core of this work, self-love, hope, balance, joy, support, security, spiritual base, and being an authentic right relationship with others. So our time together is getting short, and I want to briefly, I don't think we have time to go through all these, right? But this is the question I'm gonna leave y'all with. I want y'all to share it with friends, talk about it on social media. I want you to think about it, spend time reflecting on it. Can we step far enough out of our individually wrapped lives at the end of this to create new, more effective, just, and collective ones? Can we step far enough out of our individually wrapped lives to create new, more effective, just, and collective ones? Right? So I want you to think about, what does self-love need to look like in your life right now? What are the ways that you're loving on yourself? You can share some of those tips in the chat box, but what are the ways that you're loving on yourself with this deep sense of self-love? It's critical to us getting free. Right? Instead of letting the coronavirus amplify and solidify our impulses for to individuate, to isolate, to hunker down in our daily lives, how do we make the case that as soon as possible, activity that we turn our attention to rebuilding public spaces together, right? That we create collective spaces. What does balance need to look like in your home, in your community, in your city, in your work? Right? I want you to think about, what kind of support do you need? When this virus finally wanes and we anticipate we will be left as a population that's even more individually wrapped up and isolated than before, what will you need to break out of that? What kind of support will you need? What do you need in terms of security now and in the future? And with security, we're not talking about you're getting every opportunity. Well, what's enough? I'm gonna need you too, Bianca. Right? What does security mean for you in your life? Not safety, right? Because none of that is guaranteed. What is security? It's this illusion of safety which has helped to get us here. And then how are we going to create more equitable community space that's accessible and open? Because if this follows in line what history and what sociology tells us, folks are going to isolate even more. They're going to want to build bigger houses with bigger yards so they can put everything they ever need there so that their children and they never have to leave. Right? How do we build community spaces that will cultivate positivity and consistency and vulnerability? Spaces that will remain adaptable and flexible and forgiving. Spaces where community, where curiosity thrives. Spaces that resist fragility. Right? This is what I want us to think about. This is what I want us to understand, that we need each other to get through this. You're not alone. You are not alone. I thank y'all for spending time with me today and helping me to build community and giving me something that I didn't even know I needed until it happened. So thank y'all so much.
Desiree, thank you so very much for offering this space for us. I want to highlight for you all that I'm so glad that you were here today. This is the first of a series of webinars that are being offered today in this same Zoom room. So if you want to come back at 4 o'clock, we are going to have an incredibly intimate, powerful session with two amazing healers, activists, brujas, and death doulas who are going to talk to us about how we be in relationship with death and dying. That's at 4 o'clock. And then tonight at 6 o'clock, we have different groups around Western North Carolina and the state who have been coordinating mutual aid responses. And so if you would like to learn about what mutual aid is looking like and how we are continuing to plant and deepen the seeds of what collective care will look like beyond our dependence on the state, please join us at 6 o'clock. And as a way of offering your gratitude to Desiree, her request is that you consider donating to her fund that she's putting together that will be going to support 2 local families in need. You can Venmo your donations and contributions to @Desiree-Attaway. And in the note, just put CWC Collective. Again, yes, this has been recorded. I will be making those recordings available both as a link to a Dropbox on Facebook as well as available on my website, www.tepeyacconsulting.org. Y'all stay safe out there, stay connected, and be well. Thank you so much.